Did you know that Titanic's sinking in 1912 was predicted? Hi, I'm Robert J. Simpson, cultural historian and something of a Titanic nerd. Now, there are lots of stories about people who claim to have had premonitions about the Titanic disaster, most of which weren't actually recorded anywhere until after the event. But believe it or not, there are at least 3 authors who publish stories that seem to predict aspects of the Titanic disaster ahead of the event itself. Now, I have a long history talking about and researching Titanic. I used to do tours here in Belfast where Titanic was actually built, and this is an aspect of the mythology that I've always been really interested in. Probably the best known of these 3 authors, and the one that you might actually heard of, is an 1898 novel called Futility, and it's by an American called Morgan Robertson. Now, Robertson's tale is about an unsinkable ocean liner called the Titan, which hits an iceberg in the middle of the North Atlantic and sinks. There aren't enough lifeboats on board, and most of the passengers die. After Titanic sinking in 1912, they made a number of changes to the text for republication, which tied it even closer to the events of the night and the details of the ship itself. But either way, the connection is eerie. Titan, Titanic, North Atlantic, icebergs. Of course, some of you may also recall a couple of years ago there was a submarine that went down to the wreck of the Titanic, carrying a bunch of millionaires on board, and it imploded. And the title of that vessel, the Titan. It seems that somebody had forgotten about that rather macabre connection. Now, actually on board the Titanic in 1912 was the investigative journalist and spiritualist W.T. Stead. Stead had often predicted that he would die during a drowning, and 2 stories that he wrote tapped into his own eventual fate. In 1886, he published a story entitled How the Mail Steamer Went Down in Mid-Atlantic by a Survivor, which highlighted the issues about inadequate lifeboat provision. This is something which was a hot topic at the time. It's something that we often forget, but Titanic actually had more lifeboats on board than it was required to have by law. But even then, it was still only enough for about 1/3 of the total capacity of passengers and crew that Titanic could carry. Insane, but that's how it was at the time. A second story by Stead, published in 1892, was called From the Old World to the New, and it tells of the rescue of passengers from a vessel that struck an iceberg. The rescue vessel was called the Majestic, which seems to me to be a reference to the RMS Majestic, which was a liner owned by the White Star Line, who themselves were operators of the ill-fated Titanic. Stead gives his lead character psychic abilities in order to pick up on the disaster before the rescue is initiated, which echoed his own occult interests. Stead's predictions about his own death proved prescient. He went down with the Titanic and his body was never recovered. There is a third author, however, journalist and banker Robert Crummy, who also seems to have foreshadowed the Titanic in his 1899 novel The Lost Liner. Crummy was born in Clough, County Down, and he lived in Belfast, and he would have seen the ships under construction in the shipyard at Harland and Wolff on a regular basis. In his book, he writes about an unsinkable liner called the SS Maury, which founders in the Pacific Ocean. It is uncannily eerie that, like the Titanic, the Maury is also unsinkable. And during the scramble for the lifeboats in the story, a member of the crew shoots dead one of the passengers, exactly the same sequence of events that happens in real life during Titanic's demise. So were these writers being gifted with some sort of prognostication or just tapping into the zeitgeist? We'll never know for sure, but do let me know in the comments if you've ever heard of any of these stories. My name's Robert J. Simpson. Please do like, follow and share for more weird and interesting places, tales and local histories.